Technical notes are: use the phone for best experience. That's for your benefit if you're a listener or a speaker. As a speaker, you have to be invited to be a speaker. As a co-host, you have to be invited to be a co-host. But what you can do is request to be a speaker. And so you raise your hand to do that, or you just hit the button that says request to speak. And then hopefully I see that. And I've had trouble seeing that before. So that's a potential issue. But I don't think we have anybody in the room yet besides myself. So this is being recorded, but nobody else is here yet, looks like. So that's fine. But I'm speaking for posterity here. So what you do is you use your phone for your best experience. The iOS works best, I think. Invites don't always work. Accepting requests to speak works better. So if you are someone who wants to speak, you have to request to speak. If I don't know you, I might not accept your request. Let's see, what else do we have here? We're going to go through some definitions here of things. We're going to talk about what a culture war is. We're talking about what narratives and stories, how important they are to culture. Talk about the difference between culture comp and culture, and who's going to give you answers on culture. What is a culture war? What is culture? But here's a really good question I think people like is, when someone says culture, what do you think of, right? So a lot of people think of one thing when somebody else thinks of another. Generally, it's around some sort of art or narrative or storytelling. It could be religious in nature. It could be ethnic beliefs, ethnic culture, where you come from. And that's all good. All these are good answers for culture. So, but all of those things can actually be unified by one word, and that's story. So it doesn't matter if you're religious, if you have an ethnic background that's very strong, or if you have strong extended family who teaches these values. All of these things are united by story. So story is what gives us our identity in many ways, which is why people in Western culture are seeking for a new identity, to the point at which they're even seeking to see if maybe they should change their sex or their gender, because they're seeking for their identity. So that identity is often, and has often in history, been found in your ethnicity or your religion, or just your beliefs in your culture. It could be a pagan culture, it could be any kind of culture you come from, right? Those beliefs are found in that culture. So there's methods of exchanging and of basically interacting with culture. The primary method of doing this is language. And so the reason we talk about art so much, the reason we talk about music and film and storytelling and parables, the Bible Bible means collection of books. So it's a collection of books. But most of these books are even formed in a narrative, but you could say, rightly so, that all of them are story. Even if they're history, then history is story. So all of these things come from a subjective point of view. And so we like to feel that our religion is unquestionable, and it offends us when people question our religion or our ethnicity or things like this. But all these things are built upon story, but these stories have made us great. These stories have give us hope for the future. They bind our society together. And so this is why Hollywood is such a big deal, and this is why a lot of people don't understand why people lash out so much at Hollywood, and why Hollywood is lashing out so much at people who don't like them, calling them racists, etc. Both sides are lashing out at each other. And the reason is because Hollywood is the self-proclaimed masters of culture in the world, not just in America. And when I say self-proclaimed, I mean it's not necessarily the case. We don't necessarily believe and listen to Hollywood. We don't necessarily like all of their films or agree with whatever they say, because it's kind of ridiculous to say that you do. But when people then disagree with the narratives, the purposeful narratives that are coming out of Hollywood, Hollywood often gets upset at this. They lash out. They get angry. So this is why Hollywood is such a big deal. This is why channels like on YouTube are getting so big and such a following and growing in prominence, is because people would rather watch the criticism of Hollywood than watch Hollywood itself. And I'm kind of growing into this camp as well myself. I would rather watch someone break down a film that comes out of Hollywood than spend $20 to see that film. I'd rather watch it on YouTube. So that's just not only is it cheaper, but it's also more effective. Oh, looks like we have somebody here. Looks like we have Rebecca. She's done very well. Let me see if I can invite her. Or can you request to speak, Rebecca? If you request to speak, hopefully I can accept your request. Oh, there we go. Yes. Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for letting me be a speaker.
You're so kind. I mean, you're only 10 minutes. We're only 10 minutes in, so that's wonderful. I mean, basically, I've been talking to myself here, so.
That's where we get the best ideas, is when we're just talking to ourselves.
It is, yes.
There's a little bit of mic noise or something.
Is there?
Yeah.
Is it like this? Can you hear that?
Yeah, it was a kind of like a moving. It sounded like papers moving.
Oh, it could be because I removed these other headsets, these other headphones. I'll often wear two headphones because one of them's coming from my computer and the other one's coming from my phone.
Okay.
So I'm trying to see which one gives me audio first, or which one's better. And because one of them's an over the ear and one of them's in the ear.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of strange, but it often works.
Yes. Well, that sounds better now.
Oh, good.
So you're talking about building conservative culture? I heard you talking about Hollywood a little bit.
Yeah, I was talking about basically what culture is and the nature of culture. So how it's we might come from a culture that's religious, or a culture that's based in ethnicity, or what have you, but undergirding all those cultures is narrative and story. So our stories are so important to us, and the Bible is just means a collection of books, and in those books is stories. And so you might, people. So I was talking about Hollywood because Hollywood is the self-designated master of culture today. So they say that their narrative is the most relevant and fun and interesting, and if you don't think it is, then they get very offended at that. So and this is why these people on YouTube, these influencers and these reviewers and people like this, are becoming so prominent now. I mean, they looked into this and they found out that a lot of these people on YouTube actually have more viewers than people on TV. So
Yeah.
whether you're on streaming or what have you,
Yeah.
more people will watch them than will watch a new film that comes out of Hollywood.
Oh, yeah. Well, that makes sense.
So Hollywood is losing its kind of narrative grip on the culture.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I think this is true is because we don't understand what culture is. So culture is, I took some notes here on this actually. If you look down below, I say,
Okay.
under additional, Hollywood has subverted culture and therefore has ceded their status as engaging in making culture. Instead, they make propaganda. So why has Hollywood ceded culture? Because number two, culture is nourished through voluntary agreement on what makes up good culture. Stories and embedded values in those stories is generally what this consists of. So
Yeah.
Hollywood's given up their right to tell us what our culture is because they only make propaganda. They don't work with people and have voluntary agreement on what makes up culture. Instead, they kind of make propaganda, which is to tell you what to think. So, and when you don't think it, then they get offended. So that's the real giveaway, is that they get offended if you don't agree with them. But I also think that in many ways, Hollywood was made up of very reasonable people who, yes, they were on the left, yes, they were liberals. But I think that the problem that liberals had with the right and with conservatives is that often conservatives would actually engage in propaganda. They would kind of act forceful about their perspective. They would be pushy and preachy. And so when you didn't like what they had to say, then they eliminated you and they talked down to you and they excommunicated you and they told you that you were going to hell and all these things. And this is actually what Hollywood is doing now to people. So Hollywood has actually become what they hate. They become a religion that talks down to people, tells them that they're going to hell, they're not good enough, they have no right to say what they're saying. And they've also become propagandists. So this is the problem with faith-based film today, is that the reason faith-based film has actually become prominent in the last 20 years, and I think a lot of people would disagree with me with this because I'm a Christian. Maybe they're a Christian, maybe they would find offense at me talking about faith-based media this way. But the reason this media actually makes money in Hollywood and gets funding and actually can work in Hollywood studios, it's not like it's totally separate from Hollywood. People would say it's because they make money, but that's not necessarily true. It is true in some ways, but Hollywood also works for people because they like them and they understand them. They're both propagandists. That's the problem, is that a propagandist from Hollywood can actually in some ways respect a propagandist in the faith-based community because they kind of work in the same field. They're both preaching their gospel. And so they can kind of understand Christians and religious people now because they've become a religion in Hollywood. And so they're conflicting religions. They don't have the same beliefs, but at least they can have, when you're talking about the technical aspects of making a product, right? Which is what Hollywood mostly does. That's mostly what they're engaged in doing, is making a product. Most people are not engaged above the line, putting together these packages for films to get made. They're below the line, just working as a crew member or a cast or behind the scenes somewhere. They all do the same thing, and this is why they can respect each other. I'm not saying that they should or shouldn't respect each other. I think it's probably a good thing that they do. But what they don't understand is that they're actually engaged in making propaganda. And the problem with propaganda is that it's not art. So I was going through these additional points, right? Culture. Culture is different from propaganda in the sense that, like what number 2 says, culture is nourished through voluntary agreement on what makes up the culture. So with stories, these are embedded with values. And number 3, it says, a free and open discussion provides opportunity to form culture through cooperative, collaborative dialogue that communities have in reaction to story. And so we agree on what those values are, basically.
Yes.
But number 3 is, and this is the real clincher, because this is about how you actually form culture. A free and open discussion provides opportunities to form culture through cooperative and collaborative dialogue that communities have in reaction to story.
Wow.
Popular culture then and religious traditional culture can then get together and interact, forming bonds between the past and the future. So people, just because you're young and you have new popular beliefs doesn't mean you can't get together with the old religious traditional crowd and agree on things.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's not impossible at all. But what you have to be willing to do is have a free and open discussion, a dialogue, about what these stories mean.
Yeah.
And when people can't do that because they are intolerant, they're like teenage kids who argue and bicker and moan, and they're not willing to be listened to, they're not willing to listen, then that causes a problem. And then those people are forming their own culture basically eventually, and they could join a cult somewhere, like they could join another religion, they could join a different community,
I looked up the word culture just on dictionary.com.
Yeah.
And it says the quality in a person or society that arises from a concern for what is regarded as excellent in arts, letters, manners, scholarly pursuits, etc. And I thought that was a really cool definition. It's like it's like a group of people agreeing on what is excellent. And then here's what's also interesting is I looked it up in the 1828 dictionary, the Webster's, and it says one of the definitions is the application of labor or other means in producing. So that's got me thinking. Yeah, so it's more about nature. It's more about crops and farming, but still, it's a very interesting definition, I think.
Yeah, these are very academic definitions. I think that academia is often very kind of convoluted when it comes to these subjects, sociology, etc. And they try to turn it into this science that's very vague and, like I said, convoluted. That second definition you gave was more about economics than it was about culture. Anytime you're talking about how a society exists and subsists and builds and how it gets its values, like values in food and resources, all that stuff is much more about economics. But people sometimes like to confuse culture and economics. But I think culture is about your value system, and that's primarily dealing with things like ethnicity, religion, your beliefs about God, kind of like creation myths, things of this nature. That has a lot more to do with culture than like where you're going to get your food tomorrow. So.
Yeah.
And also, your first definition, I think, had more to do with an individual struggling with ideas, then to me it had to do with how a community agrees upon values. I could be wrong. Maybe I misheard what you said. Can you read that
Well, I'll
first
read
definition?
the quality
Yeah.
in a person or society that
Oh,
arises from a concern for what is regarded as excellent in arts, um, letters, manners, scholarly pursuits, etc. And
yeah.
I was going to use that to ask you what you thought of as being excellent in
Yeah,
that context. Yeah.
absolutely. Well, excellent is something to strive for. So it's like having hope, looking up to something that's worthwhile. And so it's a difficult striving for something better than where you came from yesterday. And so when you see something that somebody does that you find to be excellent, you admire them, you admire their work, um, you admire the meaning behind what they're doing, the values that they're inculcating in society through their work. And so that's excellence. And so it's something that we're striving for. You know, some people might just hope for it, as in some distant idea that they may not even seek to attain, but they believe in it. And this is a lot of times where religion steps into it, is that this kind of excellence in, like you were saying, letters and arts and things like
Mm-hmm.
this can inspire people to such a degree that they consider them a holy person,
Mm-hmm.
some kind of saint or guru or shaman. And so, you know, this begins a class society. So now you have a classes of people. And so it's true that people's superstitious beliefs can contribute to classism. And religion is obviously a part of this because belief is intertwined in this. Um, but I think that I think it's better to see all these things as story, because story is something that all of us can look up to. It doesn't have to do with who wrote it or who made it or the human element of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think also in our more modern society, we've learned to see people more as equals instead of shaman or things like this. It's true that Christianity and Judaism contributed to that a great deal. But a lot of people like to pretend that's not true and that our kind of egalitarian society just kind of erupted out of something different than something like Christianity. But the truth is that I think as we've grown less superstitious because of science and things like this, we regard all of these exceptional stories with exceptional values as something that we can all attain equally. And so I think this is a good way to look at culture because it means that we can all participate in culture in some way or another.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I want to appeal to. So I want to appeal to a society that's classless, which is the kind of society that Christ wanted to create in man.
Mm.
He wanted to create a society that where everyone loves their neighbor
Mm.
and regards each one of us with incredible value. And so that means all of us have potential to influence, interrupt, improve our culture in some way, even if it means to form a new culture. You know, um, there's places in the Bible where it's almost like someone created their own culture because in the beginning, in Genesis, they talked about how Cain killed his brother and then he was exiled, right? And then he formed all these cities himself.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a strange. I find it so strange. It's like he's exiled, he's marked, and then he goes and makes the first city. It's
Mm-hmm.
like
How
it's
did he
just
do that?
so it's so well. I mean, I don't know if this is getting off topic, but I just love that like even the bad guy. gets blessed by God. Like, God is just so
Yeah.
good that even
Well,
Cain
God,
gets,
he loved Cain. I mean,
yeah, he gets to go be the founder of a city.
even though Cain didn't give him an acceptable sacrifice, he still loved Cain. And what's the evidence of that? Is that he gave Cain instruction. The Bible says that God loves whom he chastens. So when he chastens you, that means he's instructing you, sometimes harshly, saying, don't do this, don't do that.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he does with Cain. Cain
Yeah.
is about to sin. He hasn't sinned yet because he doesn't like his brother now because his brother gave a better sacrifice. And so Cain is jealous of Abel, essentially. And
Yeah.
because God sees the heart of man, he knows what was in Cain's heart. And he came to visit him and say, hey, be careful because you might fall into sin.
Right.
And so what you have to do is do this and do that. He actually told Cain to rule over this evil spirit that wants to dominate him and take him.
Mm.
And so he was instructing Cain to rule over it, and then he failed to do that. And that's when he killed his brother.
Yeah.
So actually, the violence we see in the world is weakness from men who fail to rule over the devil who wants to tempt them. So that we have to put them under our feet, you know, and we have to do as Christ said. Christ said, "Get thee behind me, Satan." So we have to do that. And when we fail to do that, then we are really missing the opportunity to learn something from the situation. But again, yeah, we did get off the subject a little bit, but I love it. You know, like I love what we're talking about. So, but yeah, we can influence culture, and Cain basically, you could say, started his own cultures in these other cities simply based on who he was as a person. He was a person who was untouchable, and that's the gift God gave him. But he also punished him harshly by sending him away from the, you know, Adamic. I don't know if you'd call it Adamic or the line of Adam. So he had to leave Adam's family basically,
Yeah.
his community. But yeah, so that to me is what's put before us is that we have the opportunity to engage in culture, but we have to do it a certain way. And the way we have to do it is, first of all, understand that it's voluntary. You can't force anyone to buy your product or agree with you or what have you. You know, you could have a holiday. You could be like, oh, this is Veterans Day, and people just don't want to celebrate it. You can't, you know, you can't like force them to do that. So, you know, only God does that, right? He's like, to the Jews, he's like, have this holiday, and you also have to have fun.
Yes. Yeah, the
Well,
God
God
ordained
ordained fun.
celebrations and feasts
Yes,
in
yes,
which they are commanded to rejoice.
exactly,
That's my
exactly.
favorite.
It's quite wonderful. At first, you're kind of like,
It's
what? Like
it's
God's
wonderful.
forcing them to have fun.
Yeah.
But then you're like, well, why wouldn't I want to anyway? Like, what's wrong with me? Why am I sticking to this?
Yes. 4 times a
So,
year you got to stop what you're doing and
yep,
celebrate for a week, and you have to do this, and I'm commanding you to rejoice and have fun.
yes, rejoice. Rejoice isn't just yelling in happiness. Rejoice is like yelling in the command. Rejoice
Yeah.
now. That's funny.
I get the
But
impression. I get the impression God is good.
yes, yes, I get that impression sometimes too. Um, so what are my other notes here? I mean, we don't have to talk about some of these things, but I wanted to talk about culture war because a lot of people don't know this term actually has nothing to do with culture. And so based on what I've already said, and that's why what I said already is really important, because when you understand that it's voluntary, and you understand that there's a discussion that has to take place, culture to form, then you can understand that culture war as a term is kind of a contradiction to what culture is. So not only is war involuntary, but the term culture war itself came from the late 1800s. I think in our previous test, I mentioned that it came from World War One, but that's actually not true. I actually looked at it today again. And if you go to culture war in Wikipedia, it tells you it's from this period before World War One, but it does deal with the same people, which is the German people, right? That's why it's called Kulturkampf. But if you look at the
Wow.
definition on Wikipedia, it's actually literally dealing with propaganda, and it literally deals with a battle between the religious people and the political powers. So
Are
how
you
do you know
trying? Are you trying to make propaganda?
Well, what I'm trying to say is that that's the same people we're talking about now. Is the religious people, or the traditional people, or the conservatives,
Yeah.
and the political people are trying to change things and bring a change to their whole nation.
Yeah.
They were actually trying to form the German people into a unified nationalist force. And so they were trying to gain more political power. And this actually eventually turned into fascism. But
Wow.
it basically engaged in propaganda, but also it was about giving more power to the political side of it, because the idea was that through nationalism it would give them a national identity, and they would no longer be divided in Germany. So Prussia, which doesn't exist now, right? But Prussia was basically the most powerful part of Germany at the time. And they were the ones who were engaged in trying to create a culture war and were trying to create a national identity. And they actually, how did they do it? This is the funny thing. How did they do it? But through hating the Polish people.
Wow.
The
Having a
same
common
thing,
enemy.
same thing in Germany. Yeah, in number two, the number two war is that they had to create strength through hatred. And
Yeah.
that's what united them together. Is it's like, well, we're not going to unite on these principles, so we'll unite in our hatred against the Poles. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. So that's you could say, I don't know if that's the original foundation of nationalism, but that's the original foundation of culture war and of German nationalism and fascism. So, I find that really interesting,
That is interesting.
and it's very disturbing.
Yeah.
So you can also see how it has nothing to do with actual culture.
Mm-hmm.
A hatred of people is not what culture is about.
Yeah.
So, it's about voluntary agreement within your society. But I guess what they were doing was creating a culture of hatred, you could say. And that's what united them together in Prussia to become a stronger nation. So it's quite disturbing when you think about it. But that's also what they're doing on the left today after COVID is the hatred of people who wouldn't take the vax, the people who wouldn't mask. So this common enemy unites a people, and so
Yeah.
that's I think what they're trying to do is create division and unite people on their side against this other. So they're creating classism, and they're trying to create their own culture separate from conservatives.
So we've learned how to not create culture.
Yep.
This is what we
Thank you.
don't want to do.
Do not do this, people.
Yeah. So what can we, like what's a culture? What's an edifying culture? Like what's a culture of love that could be built. You're talking about building conservative culture. I always come back to stories.
Yeah.
Like, you build a culture on stories. And then mostly I'm thinking of movies and shows and books. But of course, also art is included, the fine arts, and music, anthems and things like that. But
Totally. Yeah. Great stuff.
yeah,
Yeah. A
like
lot.
you do an awesome job talking about legends and myths, and how can those things be used, or how can they
Absolutely.
be
Well,
used
they have to
now?
be.
Yeah.
Yeah, myth is really important because myth is the aspect of cultural narrative that really inculcates these values best. Because myth deals not only with the facts of a situation, like legends are a little bit more factual. You could say there's a certain level of verisimilitude to like legends, but myth it's almost more to do with it's not meant to be taken literally, um,
Mm-hmm.
and yet it's it encapsulates the value system very very well. So a lot of parables are like myths. You could say they're like myths, but obviously the parables are shorter, more succinct, more to the point. They're about a very specific value system, very specific value. But a myth like let's say Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, which is mythopoeia, it's intentionally created myth. Um, it encapsulates so many different values in it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for example, the story of Frodo, right? Well, there's also the monomyth, right? The monomyth, Joseph Campbell, and let's say Captain America or some other superhero. If at some point in each of their stories they suffer and die for someone else and give their life so that other people can be free, they are engaging in myth because
Mm-hmm.
that myth is based upon a larger narrative, which is from Christ, about the suffering servant who becomes king, right?
Yeah.
And um,
The
basically,
savior.
yes, selflessly gives of themselves, even when
Yeah.
nobody seems to notice or care in the moment. Later, they realize this person has done this great deed, and like in Infinity War, like Iron Man puts on the glove and sacrifices his own life to save
Yeah.
the universe, basically.
Yeah.
And this doesn't come from comic books. This comes from religion. This
Mm.
kind of story. So this is why people worship Christ, because
Mm.
they believe that he did this for us, literally. And so we're always talking about him because essentially what it means is we have life everlasting because of Christ. And so we don't really have things to worry about like a lot of people. We believe that our life has more meaning and value because of Christ.
Yeah.
So
Oh
we
yeah.
also don't care as much to fight over things like resources. We don't care as much to fight over things like in petty ways. We don't care as much to defend our clan against attacks as much, turn the other cheek, all of that. And the Crusades could have happened a lot earlier, but they didn't because people just kept um, letting go all these attacks that came from the Middle East.
Mm.
And, people could no longer go to the Holy Land. People were being attacked and raped and killed by Islam. And eventually the Pope had to stand up and be like, hey, what's wrong with you people? These pilgrimages can't happen. And then there's this other problem and this other problem, and trade is suffering and all of this. And so we have to do something about this. And so as opposed to giving them some sort of national identity to say, hey, you should protect your people and protect your ethnicity. No, instead he appealed to their religious sense and say, because that's what people most identified through, that was their culture, is to say, you'll be rewarded if you fight for Christendom, and I will make sure that you get rewarded for this, maybe in heaven or something. But also, we'll be able to accomplish many religious goals through this. You can go to the Holy Land safely, etc. And but it was also just to make them aware through their hearts as Christians that people are suffering. And we need to do something about it. We can't just let people continue to, trounce all over us. So, a just war theory was also reiterated, and the idea that there's a misunderstanding of what turn the other cheek maybe might have meant to the Christian communities. Like maybe you should protect your neighbors. Maybe that's what loving your neighbor really is protecting your neighbor. And so this is a similar issue we have today, right? With the border, the southern border. There's Christians right now who say we should be giving, we should turn the other cheek, we should continue to let them come in our nation, and we shouldn't have retribution against them, and we feel mercy against them. And so even while people are being raped and murdered and killed and our lands are being attacked, it depends on how you look at it, right? If you look at it a certain way, you're thinking, well, these are immigrants and they need help, and we're going to be compassionate towards them, and we're going to turn the other cheek. And then some other people would say, look, I was there. Like you're telling me that this is compassion, but actually people were harmed and killed and property was taken. And how can we justify that? So we're partially to blame then for this, these crimes happening and this sin happening if we do nothing about it. And so there's this sense of responsibility that has to be given to communities. And you have to appeal to their sense of something, their sense of duty or their sense of love and compassion for their neighbor or something. And this is often what solidifies societies and cultures and turns them into nations, powerful nations. And so, there's a place where it can go too far, right? Like hating the Polish people. So you can form a nation.
Yeah.
There's another place that's maybe not so bad because maybe the Polish people are murdering people, and you have to defend your villages from the Polish people. I don't know. It depends on the scenario. So there has to be, I think, an understanding of what justice is really about. And so just war theory kind of comes from that idea. But, as it comes to culture, I think sometimes it's a backlash against some threat against you. Yeah, I guess. But really, I think the definition for it, that it's a voluntary agreement between people in peace, right? That's about a discussion about values. I think that's, for me at least, that's a very satisfying definition. I think anything else, if it's based in hatred or it's based in war, I don't really consider that culture. Like I think of that as, it's kind of like you're a person, but you're a person with cancer, like you're a person that has a disease. And so I don't think of that as healthy. I think of that as very unhealthy. If it is culture, it's a dying culture. So it's kind of like what empire is to a nation, right? A nation eventually becomes some kind of empire that's attacking and destroying and killing other people. And then the only reason it survives is because it can attack enough enemies. And so it's like it's got this cancer it's suffering from. And eventually it's going to kill itself in all of those bad behaviors. So similarly to Germany, right? I mean, it basically killed itself. You know, why does a nationalistic nation have the need to attack other nations? Like that those two things shouldn't have to belong together.
Yeah.
But often it does. Often it becomes this metastasized thing that has to attack somebody else, like Hollywood attacking people for not liking their movies. It's like it's metastasized into this thing that has to attack someone that doesn't like them. Like live and let live, right? I think that's really a stronger culture that can live and let live.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of culture we want to create.
Mm-hmm.
And I think stories, I think the essence of that is making stories that inculcate real values. And obviously as a Christian, I think that those values are best expressed through biblical values, you know, as the founders of our nation mostly, I think, felt. But I think that much of this we've just forgotten. People like, it's kind of like somebody who's so oversaturated in the public sphere, like everybody knows who they are, like someone like Donald Trump or something. Like everybody knows who Donald Trump is, but nobody really knows him. Like they won't sit down and have a conversation with him, and it can never be honest and open and authentic, and so nobody ever knows Donald Trump. That's kind of how I look at the Bible today. It's like everybody knows of the Bible, but people don't actually read it and know the Bible. They don't know what the Bible actually says. So they've just kind of conveniently ignored it. Can you imagine that most Jewish people have never read the Bible? Can you imagine? As far as I know, that's the truth. And most Jewish people, as far as I know, only know very small portions of the Bible, if they do know any of it. And that's because either they're not practicing Jews, or they're not Orthodox Jews, and they teach things that actually aren't in the Bible. And so imagine that their God was the God of the Bible, but they never really read the Bible. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Imagine that no American had ever read the Constitution.
Yeah.
Or the Federalist Papers, or the documents that made our country what it is. Imagine that was the case. And this is not meant as an insult to Americans or Jewish people. This is just as an example to say you have to study these things if you want to build culture. Like if you want to actually build culture that has value, you have to study the stories that have value in it.
Yeah.
And knowing the Bible isn't just about being like a good Christian and sitting in church and folding your hands and praying and reading the Bible. No, it's about learning. It's about learning, like going to school, right? You're there to go, oh, I didn't realize that. And you're there to study things, and you're there to understand what it's talking about.
Yeah.
And so in getting that instruction, you know, which Psalms, Proverbs, all, you know, these books from the Old Testament are very much about that, right? It's very much about saying, listen, instruction is here for you. You just have to sit down and absorb it. Like, that's all you have to do. Just sit at the feet of your teacher and listen.
Yeah.
And so when a child can't do that, that child is not going to learn very much. They're not going to be a very good child to their parents. They're not willing to just sit and listen to their parents. So God is our Heavenly Father. He's our Father. He's our teacher. And when we're not willing to sit and listen to him, we're really missing a whole great deal. Like a lot of people think they know the stories of the Bible, And to me, it's like they've seen the Ten Commandments, the movie or something. They're like, oh, I know the Bible now. I saw the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston or something.
Yeah.
Like that's not that's not good enough, my friend. You have to
Yeah.
read it, you know.
You got me thinking of this verse in Proverbs, fill your thoughts with my words until they penetrate deep into your spirit.
Yeah.
You were talking about letting it wash over you,
Oh yeah.
and
Very
thinking
true.
of, Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus and listening
Mm-hmm.
when she could have been doing many, many other things.
Oh
She chose
yes.
to do that instead.
Martha, yeah, she chose to do the legwork and make sure that the itinerary of the meeting was happening
Yeah.
instead of actually sitting at the feet of the master.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, totally. Yeah, and it's not to be just about the Christian aspect of culture. Um, you know, there's also Greek mythology. There's
Mm.
also classical works. Aesop's fables. There's some very powerful cultural values in our Western civilization. They're incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and
I grew up reading Aesop's fables. It
yeah,
was one of the books that I had on my shelf when I was a kid, and many things that I read, I thought I confused it with the Bible. I actually
yeah,
thought at a young age that some of those stories were from the Bible, just from my memory. I couldn't
yep,
remember.
yep.
I don't remember when that moment was when I realized, nope, that's not in the Bible. That's one
Well,
of the fables.
it's like the Bible light. Like it's like a light version of the Bible.
I
And
guess.
what it really does for me is it really tells me the Bible is a product of that time. It really is a product of the ancient world.
Mm,
And so when you think of the Bible as a cynic, you're missing so much of the historical evidence that's right there. No, the Bible is a real document from that period
mm,
that gives you the way of thinking that those people of that time period had.
yeah.
And the Greeks were very much into intellectualism and passing around different philosophies and belief systems, and
Yeah.
they made it their business to do this on a very rational level. And in fact, they couldn't stand people that weren't rational like them. Um, so so Aesop's fables were like very much, I think, a very Greek kind of like philosophy about life, wise things to do, right? Wise attitudes to have, And then there's Plato and these people, and these are like foundation stones to our society, and many of them are like very parallel in many ways to Christianity and the way that Christian thought was. And I think in many ways they were influencing each other, and it was kind of in the water at that time. So,
I think of it like there's a golden cord of truth that gets woven through a lot of these things, a lot of the things that you mentioned, and it's even woven into our culture of the day. Like it's just
yep,
like God's truth is evident when we look for it and we can find it, and it's like it's hidden in plain sight, but it's there, and then the light hits it and glints off of it, and we like see that, oh, that was something a little more precious there. That was something true.
oh
That's,
yeah,
to me, that's different from like the word, like the word of God, the words of God.
right,
But yeah, I mean, in every story, I mean, I Christ is all in all, and
mm-hmm.
so I believe that you can see him in all,
Right,
and we need we need our Holy Spirit goggles to help us to see that. But
we do,
there it is, all throughout history, and ancient history, and now the modern era. He's
yeah,
present. He is present.
Yeah, and I think a lot more people have been influenced by the Holy Spirit when they didn't even realize that they were.
Yeah,
When you see something valuable and you're like, there's just something that rings true about that, and it really
absolutely.
affects me. I've read stuff before that just made me cry, and I was like, I don't even know why
Yeah.
I was emotional about it, but it was so powerful.
Yep.
And the only comparative moment I have is when I was praising God, and I felt like,
Yeah.
as a Christian, you just kind of like it's like being high. It's like
Yeah.
it's incredibly powerful,
Yeah.
but your mind is full of all these um, kind of like sublime thoughts about
Mm.
the beauty of God. So
Yeah.
it's very powerful and uncanny, how it can
Mm.
affect you.
Yeah.
But I think it comes from accepting a lot of truth from God. When you start accepting the truths from God, they start to kind of cut like you through a hot knife through butter.
Mm.
And so many of your nonsense beliefs get cut right through with that hot butter knife.
Yeah.
And you just kind of lay them down like they're not worth giving a second thought to anymore.
Yeah.
And then there's more beliefs that have to get cut through. But again, you have that moment again where you're praising God because you're like, you're free now. You're not burdened with this need to be perfect, and you're not burdened with this need to have the answers or perform a certain way, or you know and so many of our beliefs are actually enslaving. We're just enslaving ourselves with expectation and things that we just can't really live up to.
Mm.
um, we try to replace God with science. And that's kind of absurd because there are two different schools of thought entirely.
Mm.
One is more about a continual doubt that never goes away. That's science is a continual skepticism that can never cease. You can never be certain about science.
Wow.
It's always just a matter of getting a little bit. It's getting one more picture to the puzzle, or one more piece to the puzzle, and
Mm.
going, oh, that's a really good piece. I like that. The law of thermodynamics or something. That's a really good piece of that puzzle. And I feel like you can have a moment of praise to God in
Yeah.
each of those discoveries as well. That's
Yeah.
just wonderful. I don't mean to make this church,
No, let's
I don't,
let's make it church. Yeah, it's always church.
well, what we want to do is we're 2 minutes behind 9 o'clock, but what we want to
Yeah.
do is make it church at your space for what would
Mm.
Jesus do. So we want to start
Yeah.
having a space for you and talking about church and talking about God there. And then
Mm.
in this meeting, in this space, we want to talk about art, culture, community, making great culture, like making great art and culture, and then the values that we're kind of like spitting on these days, and how we need to protect those values by
Mm.
making more pieces of art that communities can talk about, have discussions about, that are civil and rational, and that's going to help create more culture.
Yeah.
So that's what we want to do in this show. And what I want to do is try to figure out how to get music on these spaces. I
Yeah.
I love having discussions with music, where you have intro music and stuff. I think that's really fun.
Yeah. I could pretend to be your outro music right now.
Okay.
Do 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 do
Woo,
do.
woo, woo.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
That was spontaneous.
So where can we find you? Where can we find you on the internet, babe?
You can find me on Facebook and YouTube at Rebecca Loves Jesus and on Instagram at Jesus Loves Rebecca. Where can we find you?
Well, I am now on Jon Edward Croft here on X, and also I changed my name to Jon Edward Croft on Instagram to that on Instagram.
Nice.
And I also have the Media Moses here on X, and you can go to MediaMoses.com to get stories. Most of the stories I write.
Awesome.
But I do have a writer as well named Riley, and he's a great guy.
Awesome stories, by the way, on culture, what's going on with conservative culture and media, and lots of cool updates on Angel Studios and the other people, the other guys.
It's true. We're big fans of Angel. It's true.
Yes.
And we'll talk more about them in the future. Daily Wire is conservative. There's Lower TV.
Yeah.
There's other people as well who do this cool stuff. I appreciate all of them and what they do. And I keep fighting for the culture.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
You said I had to have an outro, so that's my outro. Keep fighting for the culture. You like it?
I like it. It gets me like a little stirred up.
Woo! That's right.
Okay.
All right, people.